kind of the first thing that sort of goes on for me in the way that we've been working with you is you've got this background of like quant trading and working for the major banks, string theory, mathematics, astrophysics, the the Cambridge connection, the Oxford connection, the Cole connection, and where you got your PhD, and it all seems to sort of follow a thread of being some kind of an algorithm writer and a trader and a quant trader, and now you're in this space.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of curious about why you are in this space
Right.
when you had such a, let's just say, a career that most people would probably not fully understand, and secondly, it's some career, right? It shows a lot of commitment, a lot of study, a lot of self-development, a lot of working with big names like Bloomberg and various other people. So I'm kind of curious about the stuff that compelled you to go into this world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, as my background, as you mentioned, is mostly deal with, say, initially with research, the academic, then moved to the investment banking, like apply all this knowledge into a more action-oriented, and in terms of also getting a career, because it was hard to do that in an academic environment. And then I stayed for 18 years in finance, and then I decided to move into the entrepreneurship. I think although like all these transitions and so on, as you mentioned, there was always one thing that kind of propelled me to be in a way in a forefront, let's put it that way, of the knowledge of what was happening in the world. So that was one of the main factors to be in that forefront. It was one of them. And the others is like a bit of a curiosity, but also like risk taking, because I was never kind of feeling to have a linear career, let's put it that way. That's why I transitioned also from the quant to trading, which is also not very common to do that. Things kind of work in one ways and not necessarily in the others. So a lot of trial and error. And then I consolidated pretty much my career when I joined Bloomberg. Where I combined this knowledge both from quantitative trading to become kind of a financial engineer, then a product manager or a business manager to kind of propel kind of the products to clean up and give more transparency to the markets, come up with after the 2008 crisis. And that was a lot of dealing with toxic products that are out there, people really not understanding what was going on. So we were providing, in a way, educating the market in a way, was also providing the tools to make this more transparent. But moving forward into the topic of the uncertainty, well, it happened that I had my mind to become more autonomous, right, in terms of my career, in terms of really wanted to do something for the future after the corporate career. Yeah. And so there was like kind of this ongoing idea of moving into entrepreneurship and in more related to online, because also to give more flexibility in terms of allocation. So I designed kind of my plan, like to the 3 years plan of exit plan to move out from the corporate and so on and so on. And I started like kind of my entrepreneurship as a so-called career coach, because that was kind of what was more aligned to what my past was about, kind of a smoother transition. And so I did it, and I had done this a bit before, and I was helping people either to get into the industry of finance or helping people that were in the industry of finance but they wanted to have a promotion, to kind of follow a bit of my path. And for some, it was about a year that I was doing that full time, pretty much. But it was like it was rational, it was logic to do that, right? Given my past, I was even building my name, giving some interviews to some kind of e-financial careers, like having like kind of this branding and all this niche building up and so on and so on. You're starting like to have a reasonable success from that. But I realized it's logical to do that, but it's really not what I wanted to do. And this became transparent when I was like facing other entrepreneurs in other kind of programs of either to write better or to, be more in terms of branding and so on. And people are always saying, I mean, that I did not sound something that was really kind of what is driving me in terms of my so-called passion. And I recognize that is really not something that, the people I work with, some of them, obviously they were good, nice people. Others were just there because they want to, in a transaction environment, they get something from me, and then and then they just move on. But they're not really interested on the so-called personal development or developing themselves. It was more just to achieve a certain immediate goal. Not all of them, because some of them are going to listen to me. Others that stay with me for a long time. But I recognize this was not really my thing. Not only because of certain people that I come across, but also like it was not really connecting to what was really my rare dots. I'm going to talk about later.
Yeah.
And then I come up with this word, the uncertainty. That was really like the one thing that combined everything that I have done in my career and life. That was, looking from theoretical physics or my even like science. Actually, I dealt with a lot uncertainty in terms of understanding what was about. The finance, in a way, is uncertainty as well. And then entrepreneurship is by definition a very uncertainty as well to deal with. So there was like this common denominator, the uncertainty, that I realized that was really the one thing that prevent us or make us to really go into the levels of the unknown that we need to go if we want to really to innovate and grow in a way ourselves and provide really value to the world. So that was like the one thing that happened, and it was about a year and a half that I realized that, and since then I've been working full time on the topic of the uncertainty.
That's an interesting. It's kind of interesting because the moment you put the word uncertainty into society, okay, it can be quite a scary proposition. Okay. And I think mostly because most people don't really fully understand it. Okay. And they don't actually realize that the only thing that is certain that is that they will have, they may breathe or may no longer breathe. It's like you have no real thing, but on its, as a topic or as an idea on its own or concept on its own, it's real. Even though it's not, you can't actually physically and tangibly put your finger on it, right? It's real, it's there, it's always there. And it's something like, how do you work with it? Okay. So you've moved into that world. And with it, you've actually raised some of these questions, right? Like, for example, how we see luck tells us a lot about how we see uncertainty. That's a curious statement. I mean, most people would read that and say, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So that is actually like how I start to introduce the concept of uncertainty with my clients in this cohort that we talk about, but also in other places. And why luck? Because luck is probably a lot more talked about in society than uncertainty, as you mentioned. But I also realized that luck is nothing more than uncertainty unfolding over time. Right? So luck is kind of looking into the past, what uncertainty is into the future. So by this kind of unfolding of the uncertainty in a form of luck, it's kind of a simplified version of uncertainty, but how you see luck actually tells a lot how you're able to see uncertainty into the future, right? And by saying that, there are obviously a lot of books regarding how to build your luck. There's all these kind of things that the luck favors the ones that are preferred. All of that kind of reframes, which are in a way helpful, but I'm also like looking into how people really think about luck when the bad luck happens to them, and how not only think but also act. All right, because one thing is like reading the books, the other thing is actually feeling and emotion and actually acting on that, because that is really the one key. No, the luck concept, also curious enough, is something like if you're going to ask, and I've done this in a LinkedIn, kind of asking people in this kind of, where people can vote, the polls, right, on LinkedIn. And it is always like the case that luck perceived in the financial community is kind of almost as the #1 factor to be successful, right? So, and why is that? Because obviously dealing with a lot of randomness, obviously there are people making a lot of money, but is this about really the skill or about luck? There's a lot of things said about that. Again, 100 books that you can talk about.
Yeah.
But what people are missing is, say, the context, is, say, the perspective. Is, for example, if they are in the financial industry, it was not because someone told them to be in the financial industry. It was because of their choice. And when you're going into the financial industry, or in a more kind of drastic situation, when you go to a casino, and if you're not lucky, well, it was your choice, first of all, to go to the casino. So what I'm trying to say here is that people, is very easy to build simplistic narratives about luck in a way that is convenient to you, either to feed your ego or to protect your failures, right? And is always very simplistic narratives, very obvious way of thinking. It's like a beginning, end, that's it, move on with life. And this is like what I'm saying is, when you start to actually think deeper into these concepts, bringing perspective, bringing the context, you actually turn the obvious, what seems to be obvious, into non-obvious. And not only that, you actually recognize things that you consider as bad luck, but actually there were signals to you to move into a different direction, to actually kind of attract things that you thought it should be that way, but they are not. So why not try different? And also moving this from obvious to non-obvious, that is probably like the one factor that is key when you're dealing with uncertainty. So
Yeah.
that is why, when I mean by the way you look into luck is how you look into uncertainty, that translates into how you see luck in obvious ways with these simplistic narratives, is how you're going to think about uncertainty in a simplistic, obvious narratives, or moving beyond that into non-obvious in a more kind of nuanced way, and bringing the context and the
yeah, I think it's a great concept. And I think the problem with us cognitive types, okay, is that we always think that we can figure stuff out. Okay, so I reason and logic to everything we do. So now we move on to this other really interesting question: why thinking about thinking is more relevant than learn in dealing with uncertainty. That's I mean, most people would say, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So that obviously can bring some level of controversy, because then people say that I'm not for the lifelong learning and so on and so on. But regardless of that, what I'm claiming is, not obviously learning is useful and necessary, and I'm all for that, right? But learning is, in a way, you learn from the things that are past knowledge. It's like a bit of data history, reading the news, reading Harvard Business Review, learning about models that people have done, frameworks. By all means, they are useful to some extent, because you're going to stop where the others have stopped. Whether thinking about thinking is more about where that learning is happening, and actually able to reframe that learning into different ways, and then build or design the future, or building the future, moving beyond the learning. So, for example, I know people might not be technical, but there's this thing about Bayesian thinking, which is really much like thinking in a logical way, with a more nuance that you put probabilities in there. But basically, is about thinking in a logical way to try to find the one truth. Okay, so this is reasonable. That's how science has been built. This is how society has been designed. We need to find the one truth. If you heard about pretty much everybody that is now talking in society, is about finding the truth, right? So, okay, that's good. but that's assuming there is one truth. This is an objective reasoning. And in science, it works wonders because that's what makes able so the scientists to actually find that one truth, the models of the universe and so on and so on. But when you are dealing with subjective things, starting with economy, because it's a lot about how we perceived value, and value is not objective, it's subjective. Other emotions, like talking about, say, love or dreams, or is very subjective. So my world is different from yours, and vice versa, right? And it's not by adding more logic that we're going to solve this difference of perspectives. It's like this cartoon where there are two people looking into a number 6, but to the other looks into a number 9, right? And then they never agree that is the 6 or a 9. And by applying logic, then both kind of agree that is 7.5 plus or minus 1.5. So this is like the consequence of trying to apply too much logic on problems that are problems of perspective. It becomes a bit comic, but is what is happening pretty much in the world, in many areas. Now, why backing to the thinking about thinking is actually to realize there is like this kind of hardware or this kind of ways of thinking in which knowledge is being built on. So a Bayesian thinker, or a person that is very logical, that person can be excellent learner. I can learn everything there is to learn, which pretty much is what AI kind of doing. But is learning in that paradigm of being logical, right? And that makes you think within that closed system, which is the logical system, and not able to get out of that system, right? And it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it is the problem I have with the today's world, because people are so embedded in this kind of Bayesian thinking and so on, that it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a lot of, it is a huge parallel to how the bubbles in the financial market happens, because there are self-fulfilling prophecies. If people believe that everything goes up, then yes, then house prices are going up because people believe they are going up. That's what happened in 2006, 2007. And then you build all the products based on that belief, the self-fulfilling belief, until gravity kicks on, right? And all of a sudden it collapses. And the same thing will happen sooner or later with this kind of a narrative of AI and Bayesian thinking, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because people are so kind of consumed by that one way of thinking, they stop realizing that there are alternative ways of thinking that actually reuse that same knowledge, but in a completely different way, right? And we probably, if we have time, this the anti-logic is one of way of thinking. So that is why I refer that thinking about thinking is more important than learning about learning, because actually learning about learning has become a bit more kind of a memorizing and simulating information, almost as regurgitating, becomes a kind of an industry. It's just like kind of a fitting targets and so on. But regardless of that, the learning itself is done within a thinking framework. And if the person does not understanding that thinking framework, they keep learning, but they will go all the way into that top of the mountain until realize that that mountain is not the one they wanted to climb. Then they have to go all the way back and then climb a different mountain. So that is what I'm referring why the thinking is more important.
I think there's the thing that comes to mind when you were talking that pops up in my head. How can you solve the problem at the same level of thinking that created it in the first place?
Yeah.
Are you with me? It's like, I think
absolutely,
it's an Einstein thing, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, so I mean, unless you change the way or how you think, you will come. It's almost Pavlovian. You'll just keep on ringing the bell. The dog will salivate, and you'll feed him. Okay, and you know the Pavlovian thing is that they'll keep on ringing the bell. The dog will salivate. They just stop feeding him. I mean, it's that dog thinks that he's just going to be fed because you rang the bell. Now the next question: the history of thinking and applying ways of thinking, like negative capability and anti-logic. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, and also like maybe picking up what you just mentioned about the quote of Einstein, you don't solve the same problems using the same thing that have created them, right? So this was actually one of the things that from the very early age, even when I was, like a scientist or want to become a scientist, I was always interested on that ways of thinking. Like it's so-called the paradigm shifts in science. So this is the work of Thomas Kuhn that some of the personal development industry kind of translated that into kind of different perspectives. But the paradigm shift, what is happening in science is that there is some kind of a paradox, some kind of a contradiction. Einstein solved one of them about the light that was kind of traveling, and then the people are synchronizing clocks and never kind of fit together into kind of the old way of thinking, and this kind of reframing the issue, right? This is like really what is always kind of a bit kind of a passion to me, how people do that, because that's really where the magic happens, right? There are two types of science, as they are like in technology and so on. There are those who use an existing paradigm and they're going to make it better and better. And by all means, that is crucial. I'm not denying that is really what makes us like develop as a society and technology and so on. But there are also the other type of science, which is a requirement to change that paradigm. So that is what, for example, Einstein and others did it. By actually saying, oh, this paradigm, the old one, is no longer enough, and we need to change perspective. And here I really want people to pay attention to what I mentioned. So Einstein and others did not solve the problems that were at the time by applying more logic, right? It's not that Einstein was more logical than the others. He changed the perspective, right? He reframed the question. He reframed the situation. It's about like this 6 versus the 9. He reframed that, right? And it's after you reframe it that you actually can understand better the world, and in this case, luck, or in this case, uncertainty. And it's a question of reframing. It's not a question of adding more logic. And this is what I see that is being lost in our times, starting from the education system, corporate, and so on, and even more going into Silicon Valley, to be quite frank, because people are so embedded into this kind of incremental thinking, that is becoming first self-fulfilling in a way, but it's preventing really true innovators to actually make an impact, because now every funding is being channeled into the things that everybody is doing similar. So therefore, if you fail on that funding, then you're not really going to be responsible because others have failed as well. So you kind of wash your hands, and if you fail as well, it's also others failed. So there's like kind of a huge issue that people are not really putting truly investment in really innovative solutions, because there's this fear of being judged, and therefore is the safety. They call it innovation, but it's not really innovation. It's just an incremental aspect. AI has been there for a lot of years. Now they are trying to put in a different frameworks. Great, is improving as a technology, but how is that being used is becoming a bit, almost, infantile or trivialized how it is being tried to be used in a huge investment that is being done by these top 4 companies. So, and why is because it's a thinking problem. It's not because people are not logical, they are not reasonable. It's because they failed to really design the future, kind of reframing the things, and have like the courage to jump or kind of have that reframing done. So back to your question about other ways of thinking. Well, because I believe that the issue is not necessarily there is a lack of data, there is a lack of knowledge. The issue is about thinking. Therefore, what is the best solution? Well, let's bring old ways of thinking that were there before, but somehow have been lost in history, so that people understand that there are alternative ways of thinking to navigate uncertainty that can be applied as well to innovation, that can be applied to reframing and doing this paradigm shifts and so on, that were there, but somehow they got lost because we become so dominated by this logical data-driven that is consuming us. And there's also side effects, by the way. I mean, if you go into trying to be too logical to data, then you start to lose meaning, and there's like these questions about people don't finding meaning in life and having like this the huge need for personal development. Well, at the end of the day, that is a consequence of like the world becoming so dominated by the reason, so-called reason, and the logic and the goal target and the doing more and more and more, that you become lost into really what human is, right? Which is like understanding the world in different ways. So therefore, why people get lost and they try to find meaning and they try to get answers there that are not there, because at the end of the day, you need to create meaning. You're not going to find meaning. You need to
I agree. Yeah,
to do that.
Yeah.
To do that, you need to start to think in a different ways, and that therefore is a thinking problem again. So everything is a thinking problem. So that is why I realized that it's not by talking about bias, it's not talking about specific things that everybody is talking about. It is more about really, first of all, making people realize the situation where we are is a thinking problem that has been dominated by this overly logical data, and B, that there are other ways of thinking that you can apply into your own situations, and from there build yourself either in a career, business, or life in the ways that you find it more meaningful to you and really to create value. So negative capability and anti-logic being an example of that wisdom that has been lost.
Well, I think it's excellent stuff. I mean, I thrive on this stuff. I'm always going to be the sort of person that will say, you know, how can I use this in my own settings, you know? The thing that sort of stood up there for me a little bit was the again, the sort of in my world, in the world that I live in, it's, you know, we work in the leadership world, and it's about the consciousness, okay? And you call it stickiness, I call it stuckness, okay? So if you're thinking in a particular way, right, and you're pedantic about thinking in that particular way because you believe you have enough evidence to actually believe that this is going to be the right way to think, because you may be or may not be successful depending on how you define that. But you never really ask the questions from a different level of consciousness, you know, which questions how and the way you think. And you never go into that world, which means that it's kind of stuck in the same place, right? And because the stuff that we have trending around the globe at the moment, you can see there's a lot of stuckness in the same place, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to beat up on the same problem in the same way in the hope that they're going to get resolution. Okay, so here's the next question, which I think is interesting. The worry about how we are dealing with problems in today's world, a thinking problem, not a knowledge problem.
Yeah, so we mentioned about that. It's not like the issues that we are facing in the world are a lot of issues of perspective. So my perspective is different than yours. Yours is different from another person, and everybody gets in a conflict because everybody wants to be right. Everybody wants to find the truth, and their truth is always going to be different than someone else's truth, and it becomes then a fight between I am right, you are wrong, and that's like how the world is becoming. No. By all means, obviously, these situations, I don't want to trivialize the problems of the world, but there is a huge issue is that how people think is how the problem started. And therefore, as you mentioned, it's not going to use the same thinking that we're going to solve them. Unless be by applying more logical, because logic is just an enclosed system. So, and you're going to be very logical. It can be very logical about your assumptions, about the data that you see, and prove right, and still you can be wrong. And that's kind of the limits of the logic as a self-enclosed system. Even like mathematics is some of that, and being Gödel's incompleteness theory is one example. So, therefore, I also wanted to make an opportunity here that to open up to a different world, because obviously my thinking itself is being somehow shaped by other thinkers, right? So what I'm saying is not something that others have not said. I'm kind of reviving and putting in a different perspective so people can understand. And one of the offers that or the thinkers, recent ones that kind of shape a lot how I see even the world, is by the name of Ian McCrudge. and he has like this theory or framework or way to understanding how humans interact with the world, and he's a neuroscientist, has done huge work on that area, and it's about like our two hemispheres, the left and the right hemisphere. Now, when people listen to this, they always going to fall back, and again, it's a thinking problem, to the old concept of the left-right hemisphere, which is about what the brain does, right? It's a kind of a mechanical perspective of what our brain does. But this kind of left versus right, what the brain does, is being demystified. So it is not at all what Ian McCrudge mentioned. But again, because of this default way of thinking, it prevents actually for people to understand what he says. and this is what I made this caveat. So it's about like how you pay attention, how you observe the world, right? And how you're going to observe, how you pay attention to things, that's going to dictate how you're going to think about them, and therefore how you're going to act upon them, right? And therefore and again, I'm not like suggesting that this model framework, whatever you want to call it, is like the final one, the truth, but it helped me at least a lot to actually understand a lot of the issues that are in the world and kind of put together with all the other work that I've done. And it's like about kind of the left hemisphere, paying attention to the details, to kind of fragment the things, to manipulate, which is very much what science does in the old days. Now it's probably shifting a bit more, but is how you dissect, the frog, dissect the world, put in parts and then quantify them and putting logic to build like things, abstract things on top of them, and then manipulate without really understanding what it does in a bigger context. Whether the right hemisphere is that kind of the way to pay attention is a bit more holistic. I don't want to kind of trivialize because it's really deep work, but it's more about understanding the things in a more meaningful way, in a more wisdom. That the things are as a whole, not like cannot really fragment. I mean, if you fragment a music and you just listen bit by bit, there is no longer music in there. It's like by adding together that it makes the music, the song itself. So it's about this understanding of the wholeness as well, to pay attention. And what it does, what it says as well, is that kind of the right hemisphere should have been kind of the one that leads the left, but the left has been kind of monopolizing, kind of taking over, because the left does not need to have the right hemisphere, and it proves right, because actually is a self-fulfilling. So you can manipulate the data, you can like quantify things, you can change, and it proves right to be right. It's a self-fulfilling, what you just mentioned. And throughout the world, more and more, our society is being driven towards a left hemisphere than to a right. And this is like the cause of a lot of issues. He claims one, for example, the climate change. And that one is just an example. That climate change, I mean, there are people, you can speak about climate change, you can try to convince people, and people may be convinced, but never really affects them, right? Because they never really say it's something that you can't touch, You prefer, I prefer to drive a Ferrari than, and yeah, I'm okay for the climate change, but you know what? I can see other things that are more willing to grab them, right? So therefore, why? Because it's kind of more the left hemisphere taking over. So that's kind of why he mentioned, like, an example is the climate change. And other thinkers before him say the same thing. Is like, it's a problem of thinking. It's not necessarily a problem of obviously, the pollution and so on. There's a problem in there, but it's like, at the end of the day, it's a problem of thinking, and therefore that is what I refer as the issues in the world is a problem of thinking. Not
yeah. Okay, so I'm just thinking, right, for myself and with you. So you run these cohorts, okay? And you attract people from across the globe, right? And I know because I participate in them and I quite enjoy them, okay? They certainly have stretched my thinking, okay? The idea of the cohorts from you, I think, through these questions has been answered to an extent, okay? But now we've got guys who are curious about you, right? And we've got guys who are curious about your cohorts and the work that they will do in those cohorts. Here's a bizarre question, right? Which would indicate that I probably haven't been listening, but in fact, if they are entrepreneurs and they're in the world of looking for tangible sort of practice-based implications that they can take out into the world and say, right, I've changed the way I think on this particular thing. I'm going to put it into practice in my organization as a leader or as a senior leader. The question behind that would be, what do you think that they will get from the cohort for themselves as entrepreneurs and business leaders? And if you like to use the word coach, right? What do you think they will walk away with?
Yeah. So there's a very important question because it's something that it's people obviously ask similar questions. I can say first what is not about, because it's always good to compare. Is our human brains works better on a A versus B comparison. So the cohort is not about me providing some kind of advice on how people should think. It's not about me kind of going through a huge lessons of what uncertainty is about, how you kind of create your own like presenting frameworks, which by all means they are kind of important, but you pretty much probably they are available for free anyway out there, so you can do that. So that is not what it's about, and it's not about like the old convention coaching of kind of not necessarily just advising, but kind of trying to find yourself and the kind of these things that are out there, like trying to find meaning. So that's not what we do. What I go through is above all an experience. So therefore, it might attract some people, might not. It's the same thing about, it's not necessarily something people see it as an immediate need if they don't understand it. So, but it's something for those who really wanted to move beyond just like reading books and memorizing mental models and being on LinkedIn all the time, trying to find information. Because what it does is really an experience, and this is what is important. Is the difference between, say, going into a very nice restaurant because you don't want just to eat food, you want to have an experience, or just to have like, to supermarket and buy food because you're still hungry. So they both meet the need, but the experience is where you got to get the most out of it. And why I talk about experience, going back to the luck factor, it is an experience how you deal with that, the same way that you deal with the uncertainty. Therefore, what the cohort offers is, in a way, a safe environment because it's between us, where you can fail in a gracious way, but it's going to be able to come out with that kind of innate ability that has been lost in us, in humans, to think in a different ways, that has been kind of overcome by the dominant way of thinking in an experience, and also like to understand what are, say, what I call the enemies in a kind of in a way, like the fears and the things that gets in our way in terms of understanding these different ways of thinking, and therefore, because it's an experience also like with other people, regardless of the different backgrounds, and this is what is really the key. So I have people, entrepreneurs, I have obviously from finance, I also have coaches, and also like people in different stages of their lives. They wanted to apply this in their own work, but they also wanted to apply in their own life. And regardless of all these different contexts or backgrounds, there is one thing that people usually share with me, because the experience is pretty much similar to go through the uncertainty. And therefore, the experience is about like not only the thinking, but understanding how they perceive that emotions, they experience that during the week, and start to analyze themselves and others, and really kind of navigate through uncertainty in new ways they never thought before. And therefore, what they will get is really like they're not only an experience, but then their experience will be different from the particular ways to get that experience, I tell them like to write the so-called uncertainty manifesto, which is kind of writing their own way of going through the uncertainty that can be used in different settings. So therefore, it's not something that they will only use as of today, but they can reuse this in a future settings. It's a bit like almost as learning to walk. If no one has never able to walk, it's just a really analogy that I'm trying to say here, because these ways of thinking have been just forgotten, but they are innate in us, in human beings. It's just that they're being forgotten in a way because of the cultural and society.
I mean, the way I relate to it, I mean, I've been through, I think I'm in the 3rd iteration of your program. Okay. It's immediately when I come out of it, right? When I come out of it, right, I start, I do this like a speed writing session, where I turn off the editor and I look for that one thing, okay, that I can apply in practice. Okay. The one that I'm playing with at the moment is, so when I come out of your workshop settings, I then go into my workshop settings and into my programs with my clients. And, I get into the last one that I've started working on is the rare dots, right? Okay. And I'm working with it, and it's getting people to rethink, and deal with the non-obvious, right? What pushes up against, what would be logical, and which is now what they call anti-logical. It's there it is. So, it's so blinking obvious we can't see it. Okay. And I'm finding that it's quite powerful. To you, how will they get hold of you?
Oh yes. So if people, if you are interested on joining our cohort, there will be a link I can share with you to register your interest.
All right.
And if why not also connect with me on LinkedIn? I'm prominently on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So you can reach out to me, and yes, and then on the link of register interest to my cohort, we also have the flexibility or the option to book a call with me. So it's an option. So you can do that as well.
Yeah, if you